I wasn't like other children growing up. I didn't like talking to those smelly things in kindergarten, and I never participated in their silly games. But I had my own games to play, and oh, what fun games they were. For example, a little girl once asked to borrow my crayons. I told her she could have them if she would tell our teacher to fuck off. She got sent home for that. I remember hearing her mother scream about the beating she would get later. Fun games, right? It didn't take long for the teachers to notice that the other children avoided me and how I never seemed to show emotion of any kind. They didn't think I heard them whispering about me, but I did. I have exceptionally good hearing. Little monster, said Mrs. Guthrie. Sociopath, whispered Mr. de Pascal. Even at my young age, I had an extensive vocabulary. I had never heard of the word sociopath before, and I was intrigued. When I got home that night, I looked it up in my mother's encyclopedia. Sociopath, a personality disorder characterized by a lack of empathy for others. I would have to agree with you, Mr. de Pascal. Elementary and middle school passed by quickly. I learned to fake emotions and excitement in order to fool my teachers and parents. I couldn't fool my peers, though. No matter how convincing my act, they always seemed to instinctively know that I was different, and they gave me a wide berth. Every once in a while one of them would try to make friends with me, and that's when I could really have some fun. But despite how I treated those around me, I didn't hate any of them. It wasn't until high school that someone finally managed to piss me off. That someone was Travis Murphy. The Murphy family moved into my neighborhood before the start of 10th grade. They had 2 children, a son, Travis, and his sister, Marion. I was looking forward to the inevitable time when my parents invited them over. Neither Travis nor Marion had ever met me, and so they had no way of knowing of my sociopathic tendencies. They would amuse me quite a bit. But this time it would be I who was blindsided. Marion started out easily enough, displaying the normal interest and kindness by those who don't yet know me. After some time, however, I realized that she thought I was handsome and was even starting to develop a crush on me. No girl had ever done this before, and it was an entirely new experience for me. Fascinated, I decided to spare Marion from my games for a while longer and keep her around. So I continued to fake smiles and feign interest in what she had to say. Travis was an entirely different story. He seemed to have as little interest in me as I had in anyone else. I couldn't play my games with him. He was completely uncaring. It angered me for the first time in my life. Over the years I had come to realize that I was special, far more important than these insects surrounding me. Why else would they be drawn to me, even as they know how alien I am to them? For one of these insects to dare ignore me. For the first time in my life, I made the first move. I tried making small talk with Travis. I feigned emotion and interest in his life and did everything I could to make him interested in me. Nothing. I was furious at first over his lack of interest, but over the years I came to realize that he was like me, a sociopath. Completely devoid of caring for others. Instead of alleviating my frustration, this only increased it. I was special, unique. But now there was another one like me. If I wasn't unique, could I still be special? Or was I ordinary? Just another insect? No. I refused to be ordinary. One may as well be dead. And so that's what I endeavored to do from that day forth. I would make Travis ordinary. I would kill him. Fueled by passion as I was, I waited. High school passed and college started. Trifles. I learned new ways to express myself through sex with Marion. I learned the value of pain and how to make her beg for it. It was all very fascinating at first, but, like everything else, it eventually lost its intrigue. My focus shifted away from Marion and back to Travis. I was fully ready to kill him, but cautious. I wasn't naive enough to think the insects would let me get away with it if they knew I murdered him, and I wanted to avoid prison at all costs. I fear nothing except boredom, and that is what prison is. Endless boredom. I couldn't act impulsively. I had to be calculating and crafty. As long as I was taking my time, I figured I may as well have some fun. My first chance to toy with my prey came about my second semester in college. Travis and his family were leaving for a week to visit a relative or some such bullshit, and they were leaving their dog behind. They paid a neighbor to check in on him 3 times a day, giving him food and taking him outside. I watched this for 2 days, learning what the schedule was before making a plan. The night before the Murphys returned, I crept into the house after the neighbor fed the dog for the last time. Marion had given me the security code to shut off the burglar alarm so I could sneak in for sex. Wearing gloves and a mask, I entered the house, unseen by the sleeping neighbors. The dog knew me by scent and didn't bark. He bounded to me, tail wagging and tongue hanging stupidly out of his mouth. I worked quickly, taking his head in my hands and crushing it, driving my thumbs deep into the eye sockets and feeling the dog's skull fracture in my palms. He let out only a quick whimper before falling silent forever. Good boy. I brought a homemade kit along with me, a scalpel and various other instruments stolen from the science lab. I eviscerated the dog, wrapping his intestines around the living room light, ensuring that it would be the first thing the Murphys see when they got home. The thought of them turning on the fan and being pelted with drops of blood amused me. I used most of the dog's blood to write the threatening message, "You're next" on Travis' bedroom wall. I left the carcass on his bed. As a private joke, I left the dog's heart on Marion's pillow. Satisfied with my handiwork, I went back to my dorm, where I slept quite soundly. There was a big commotion the week following the day the Murphys returned. Stories and images of the carnage in their house were on the local news every night. There were rumors that the Murphys were going to move away soon. Supposedly Mrs. Murphy couldn't stand to be in the house anymore. I had to act fast. I couldn't allow my prey to escape from me. Sitting in my dorm, I dreamed of all manner of destruction for my enemy. There was a flash of light over my wall, headlights from outside. That was odd. It was almost midnight on Saturday. Nearly everyone was already gone. Curiosity overtaking me, I went to the window to see who would be coming to the dorm at this hour on a weekend and was surprised, one of the few times I've ever truly been surprised, to see Travis' car sitting in the driveway. Fortune smiled on me. The building was nearly empty for the weekend and now was the perfect time to strike. My prey was unsuspecting and alone. After killing him, I would take his body and deposit it somewhere else on campus. There was virtually no chance of getting caught. No one wants to stay on the weekends and the electricity was shut off on campus for another 6 hours. No security cameras. In a considerably jolly mood, I grabbed my flashlight and scalpel and set out to stalk my prey. The dark never bothers me. Having very little emotion, my rational mind tends to dominate, and the rational part of human beings know that nothing is waiting for us in the dark, or at least, that's what we think. Several minutes into my hunt it occurred to me to turn my flashlight off. I don't want to alert my prey. I switched it off and waited for my eyes to adjust. I leaned against the wall and played with my scalpel to pass the time. A normal person probably wouldn't have heard the light breathing in the hall, but I've always had exceptionally good hearing. I whipped my head in the direction of the sound. My eyes hadn't yet adjusted to the darkness, but I was able to make out a figure exiting down the hall and I could hear the unusually light footsteps. Whoever this person was, they were taking care to avoid detection by me. I rushed to the spot they were just standing at and breathed in deeply. There was just the faintest hint of cinnamon. Travis kept a cinnamon air freshener in his car. I grinned widely. I was on the trail of my prey. I followed him down the hallway and was disappointed to find that it branched out into 2 other halls. I again tried smelling each hall to figure out which one Travis took when I heard a brief commotion to the right. I hesitated. Would Travis make that much noise if he was trying to get away from me? After a moment I took a chance and headed in the direction of the noise. After a minute or so I stopped. Ahead of me, there was someone lying on the floor. Approaching carefully, I realized the body was lying in a pool of blood. I touched it. Still warm. I rolled the body over to see who it was. Mr. Chauncey, the night custodian. I hadn't realized that Travis was capable of killing someone. In my hatred for him, I had forgotten that he was just like me. Just as cold and unfeeling. He was more than able to do everything I could. I froze. There was light breathing in front of me again, but I couldn't see its source. For the first time in my life, I felt fear. I no longer felt like the hunter stalking his prey. I felt hunted. My rational mind was overcome by emotion and I fled back to my dorm room in terror. I barricaded the door and waited, scalpel in hand, for Travis to come for me. After several hours, I started to resent myself for feeling this way. He was only a man, however extraordinary. The fact that he had actually frightened me fueled my hatred for him and I left to search. Mr. Chauncey's body was gone, the pool of blood cleaned up. The hints of cinnamon in the air had long since dispersed. I left the building to wait in Travis' car for him only to find that it was gone too. Fury taking hold of me, I started in the direction of his house. I clenched my scalpel tightly, relishing in the fantasies of what I was going to do to him. I should have been paying more attention because I never even heard him creep up and was too slow to avoid the baseball bat swinging through the air for me. It connected with my wrist and I felt the bones snap. I dropped the scalpel and lunged for it with my good hand but a boot kicked it away. Looking up, I saw Travis grinning down at me. He brought the bat down again and again. I thought he'd never stop, but he did. Lying there on the sidewalk, broken and bloody, I waited for death to come. Instead of the Reaper's skull, it was Travis' face grinning down at me. Even though I was helpless before him, I still burned with rage. He leaned in close to smell my bleeding face and whispered in my ear, "We're going to have such fun together." I spent 2 weeks in the hospital before leaving against my doctor's wishes. Travis clearly had held back on the beating. I only had a broken wrist and several cracked ribs, though most of my body was heavily bruised. Every step hurt but I ignored it. I had a purpose. I would never be a victim again. Travis had an advantage over me in that he knew I would come and he was not injured like me. So I figured I would even the odds. I stole my father's pistol and waited for night to fall. It was nearing 3 in the morning when I crept up to the Murphy house once again. The adult's car was gone, but Travis' Mustang was still there. Good. We wouldn't be interrupted. I could take my time. I turned off the burglar alarm, marveling at how stupid the Murphys were for not changing it. I opened the sliding door and stepped lightly into the house. All of the lights were off but my eyes were well adjusted to the darkness. I silently approached Travis' bedroom and pulled out the gun. After a moment to steady my resolve I burst in. I was not prepared for what I saw. Travis was lying on his bed, a look of mild surprise on his face. His throat was slashed from ear to ear. Blood was everywhere, including a message on the walls that read "Bad Boy." In my shock I didn't hear the light footsteps creeping up behind me and knew no more of the next few moments except a dull thud on the back of my skull. I awoke in a basement, tied to a chair. Absurdly, my first thought was how cliché this seemed to be. My eyes took a second to adjust and I saw a naked figure standing in front of me. Its body was covered in blood, which I presumed was Travis. Through the pounding in my head, I heard the figure speak. "I didn't want to do it like this. Why couldn't you boys just behave yourselves?" The figure paced in front of me. "No one ever does what they're supposed to. You weren't supposed to find me. Mr. Chauncey wouldn't get out of my way." The figure stopped in front of me. "Travis wasn't supposed to hurt you. I told him not to, but after he realized what you were he just couldn't help himself. I suppose that's why you went after him too?" The figure stroked my face tenderly. "I watched you when you killed our dog. You never knew I was there. I'm real good at hiding. It was so sweet of you, to leave me the heart. I still have it." Marion smiled at me. I could see something in her eyes. Something I didn't have. The absurd part of my brain started to point out the difference between sociopath and psychopath. We have the silliest thoughts at the silliest times, don't we? I didn't want things to work out this way, but it's okay. We'll make it work. I'll kill my parents when they come home and we'll go far away, to someplace beautiful where we can be together forever. I thought about feigning emotion and manipulating her into letting me go, but I knew when I looked into her face that it was useless. She didn't care about my situation. Only hers. A complete lack of empathy. Credit to Jacob Mielke. Post views 6,848. Please wait. by Beach, Alabama, 1995. Friday, between pitch dark and first light, the Gulf Breeze, a shrimp trawler out of Corpus Christi, Texas, entered the bayou shell banks. A dead fog full of moonbeams rested over the marsh. Swamp stench curdled the air, a real nose burner. As she passed through the canal, her wake from port side slapped gently against the outer bank. Like waltzing shades, the fog wobbled to life. Apparitions materialized and danced in the moon-spangled haze. Isaiah Shanks braced himself. Isaiah saw a monster with hungry eyes, clenched teeth, and spider fingers working feverishly within his palms. A black trench coat, splotched with filth and stench of sulfur, draped his hunchback form. Under a brown fedora, still wet from the storm, drops of moisture raced around brim's edge. Underneath was hid a flat cratered face, cursed with a squashed nose and owl-like eye. Behind the royal blue drapes he stood, still as death. The young mother was wrapped in a white cotton towel tucked between the valley of her breasts and reached to her knees. Seated at the vanity, head tilted, she shook the wet strands and felt them fall to the small of her back. Reaching over her shoulders, Mary Ann's delicate fingers combed through her velvet tresses, then paused to massage the soft nape of her neck. She reached for the ivory hairbrush resting on the right corner of her vanity. There was a sound, one that shouldn't be in the room. The intruder stepped from the curtain. Footsteps, heavy footsteps. The wood floor creaked and popped as the repulsive monster advanced toward its prey. Incarnate evil was in her mirror. Petrified, Mary Ann jumped to her feet like a tripped coil spring. A small bottle of perfume crashed to the floor and broke into bits and pieces of colored glass. Sweet Carolina jasmine filled the room. No place to hide. Nowhere to run. Retreating to the nearest corner of the room, Mary Ann screamed, "What do you want? What do you know?" Word to announce intentions. He pulled free the towel. Then with a backswing, his right hand struck Mary Ann a pile-driving blow. Unconscious, he threw her to the bed like a rag doll. No escape. He would consume her soul. Yes, to consume, that is what evil does best, to steal peace, to kill hope, and to destroy a living soul. He wrapped his putrid green hands around her fragile neck and the vapor boiled, the images vanished. Isaiah Shanks slid down the outer bulkhead. He'd seen these visions so many times. He lay crumbled on the deck. Sweat cascaded over his distorted face, his eyes welded shut. Isaiah didn't want to remember, it was too painful. He twisted his head to one side, then the other. Spasmodic jerks. He fought the urge to look and remember the mean man of his boyish past, but the compulsion was too strong. Eyes wide open, Isaiah stared again into the fog. The mist continued to stage a part of his life he could never forget. The apparitions reappeared. The intruder saddled the unconscious woman. He gritted his teeth. Calloused hands transformed themselves into a snake-like vice as they constricted around Mary Ann Shanks' slender neck. Like so much Play-Doh, he felt innocent life squeezed between his fingers. He gasped in demented moaning as he mumbled, "The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away." For a moment, his grim work was interrupted by the sound of rusted hinges. His head spun to one side as he strained bulging eyes. A little boy stood in the shadows who sought the warmth of his mother's embrace. An innocent child of 5, Isaiah could not understand the evil that towered before him. The beast turned to inspect the boy. The child was of no consequence. He returned to his labor. Tighter. 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 Mary Ann's frail form shook with a last spasm as precious breath disappeared like water swirling around an open drain. There was a gurgled groan. It was done. She was finished. Stretched across her bed, Mary Ann Shanks lay still as any midnight grave. Little Isaiah watched as the fiend of the night stepped through the blue curtain that covered the window. "Mean man. Mean man," the little boy chided. The murderer paused. He stared hard at the child as if he was trying to remember a time of innocence in his own tortured life, a time when he danced with joy upon the holy mountain of God. The thought of it, like the fire of molten lava, erupted within his dark and formless soul. He screamed with searing pain beyond human comprehension as the black trench coat transformed into dark shining scales. His face protruded as he made a hissing sound unintelligible to the human ear. As I have no peace with God, neither shall you. You worm of flesh, I curse you. The day will come when I reign in chaos and I will destroy you and all your putrid kind. Live in misery. Live hopeless. Live in war. Live godless and let there be no peace with God. A thunderous explosion. A flash of lightning outside the window, an unworldly, white brilliance, flooded the room illuminating the body of Mary Ann Shanks. Holding his brown teddy bear under his left arm, the confused child walked to the left side of his mother's bed, little Isaiah pulled on the arm that hung over the mattress edge. Mary Ann's head rotated, her eyes glazed and red-stained. The child recoiled, screamed, then fell backward against the wall sliding to the floor. His small form was crumbled with arms cradled around his knees. And there he sat, eyes shut, until neighbors entered the house. Post views, 2,489. Please wait. Do you ever look back on your early childhood, and wonder which memories are real, and which are fabrications of your overactive imagination? Have you ever had a memory that you think might have been a dream? Our minds are capable of doing terrible things to us, but so are people. I'm not sure which one traumatized me for most of my childhood. I remember despising kindergarten. I went to Duggan Elementary School in Farner, Tennessee. Naturally, I hated it. But how I felt about that place by the end of the year went beyond simple loathing. Obscure memories of those days still resurface in my mind from time to time. I remember hearing and seeing things that I was too young to understand. I just have these vague images and sounds in my head that I can barely recall. I don't have nightmares anymore. I guess what scares me most is the memory of how I felt at the time. Recently, I found an old photo album of my kindergarten year. It took me back in time. I recognized a picture of my teacher. He was an extremely old man who we called Mr. Arata. There was something about him that seemed, well, he didn't seem very child-friendly. He drove a long white van to school every day. It was called the stupid van because the kids all hated him. Mr. Arata was irritable and cross, but he sure knew how to act when he was being watched by other teachers or the principal. One day, at my house, I remember my mother telling me that one of my classmates had gone missing. She was watching the news and was, understandably, very upset. When a second child in my class went missing, my mother abruptly pulled me out of school. She told me that she would send me back when it was safe. I thought it was great, not being in school. I was too young to understand what a child's disappearance could actually mean. Too naive to think about it realistically. I remember that, after a while, I went back. The kids had been found, but they did not go back to school for whatever reason. I heard one of my fellow students tell me that the kids who had disappeared had no recollection of what had happened. She said that they had been cut open under the belly button and stitched up. She knew those two kids well. I think her name was Katie or Kitty or something. I just assumed that she was lying through her teeth. Even as a 6-year-old, I wasn't credulous enough to believe something like that. Later on in the year, I remember the girl, let's just call her Katie, talking about how one of the kids who had previously gone missing had passed away. She took a week off from school because of it. Apparently, she had kept in touch with the two kids after they switched schools. Katie said that the child had been sick ever since they found him with no memory. At this point, I thought she was making up more lies to get attention, but she did genuinely seem miserable now that I think of it. Little kids aren't that great at acting. I remember that one day, I had a terrible nightmare. The day started out normally. I remember going to lunch, and I think I remember getting up to leave after the bell had rung to return to class. I'm not sure what happened next because that's the last thing I remember before having the nightmare. Suddenly, I was on a table, strapped down. I could see tinted windows on the narrow walls by my side. Everything was pretty dark. I was in a very cramped rectangular room. I just sat there for a moment. Clearly, I remember looking about and feeling the straps on my wrists and ankles. I looked to the side of me, and there was a tray with surgical instruments on it. I did not know how I got there in the first place. I was confused and on the verge of tears. A man dressed like a doctor came to see me. I couldn't make out his face because it was so dark there. He just looked at me for a moment, then he turned on a bright light that was mounted over top of me, like the kind they use when you go to the dentist. He was wearing a doctor mask and had a blank expression on his face. I was stunned with fear. He casually reached for a scalpel, and grabbed one from the tray. I began screaming and crying. He looked slightly taken back. The man uttered a few words, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. I awoke to the harsh scolding of Mr. Arata. I was lying down asleep on the bleachers in the gym where we would wait for our bus numbers to be called. He was telling me that I had fallen asleep and missed the bus. He took me back to his class, and called my mother to come pick me up. I started crying as soon as I had time to think about the dream. He didn't try to comfort me, he didn't even ask me what my problem was, he just stared at me. I told him that I had experienced a terrible nightmare, and he nodded at me. At least, I think he did. My mother spent the whole day trying to reassure me. The most disturbing part is, I usually wake from a nightmare as soon as I began feeling terror. But this, I was screaming and thrashing about for an extended amount of time, it all seemed real. I was convinced over the years that I had hallucinated. I began getting homeschooled because I was extremely terrified of going back. My parents couldn't understand how a nightmare could cause someone to have the kind of issues that I had. I had a few dreams about the experience. It wasn't like I was having a reoccurring nightmare. It was as if these nightmares were much less real than my original nightmare. They were just the original experience in dream form. They say that the sense of smell is the best way to remember something. Years later, when I was a grown man, I visited my grandfather in the hospital. There was something about the smell that brought me back. It made me think about that dark room. I went over to my parents' house and flipped through some of the old photo albums, looking for anything to help ease my curiosity. While I was looking through the photo album, I found a picture of the class and Mr. Arata. It had some writing on the back, but it wasn't in English. Arata is a Japanese name, so I guessed that was what language it was. I knew that one of my dad's friends spoke Japanese, so I took the photo to him, and he translated it for me. I looked underneath the original text to see the scribblings that the man had left. The translation said, "I had a great time working on you this school year." I went back to the photo album and started rapidly searching through it. I didn't want my dream to be a reality, but I had to know for sure. There were photos of me performing all kinds of activities. I even found photos of the time that my mother brought the class cupcakes for my birthday. Almost every picture had Mr. Arata in it, with a stern look on his face. I held one picture in my hand, a picture that my mom took of me during a school play, and it seemed thicker than the others. I noticed tape on the edge of the picture. Two pictures had actually been taped together. I took a knife and cut the two pictures apart. What I saw haunted me. Underneath the regular picture was a picture of a small boy strapped to a table in the dark. I compared the picture with the other ones and it was me. I looked on the back of the picture of the play. The back was originally facing the picture of me on the table, and it had more Japanese writing on it. I had to sit down. The dread and paranoia was coming back to me. I took the writing to the same man who had translated the first note. He seemed quite confused by what he read. I came to this country to continue what I started in Manchuria. Post views, 3,909. Please wait. In recent weeks, a rash of murders has swept the city. Police are calling it the work of a serial killer, but when questioned about this statement, police spokesman Daniel Garfield refused to comment. All authorities will say at the moment is that each victim received a voicemail minutes before they were killed, saying, quote, "Be careful. Once again, be careful." Police are still investigating the events, and ask that anyone with information about these murders contact them immediately. You shut off the TV, sick of bad news for the night. A glance at the clock on the DVR tells you that it's 4 minutes past 3. You sigh. Your wife won't be home for another hour at least. She's been working the night shift all week. Tired of waiting, you crawl into bed and fall asleep, thinking of the recent murders. Don't you have a friend on the police force? You should really call him sometime. Tomorrow morning, you awake next to your wife. She must have come home sometime last night. Poor thing looks dead tired. You decide to just let her sleep. Getting up and around, you flick on the radio in time to hear, "Murderer struck again last night." The same message was found on the voicemail of the latest victim. Police are continuing investigation. Again, goes the radio. Still raving about that serial killer. You grumble your way to the coffee machine. When the phone starts to ring, you freeze. What if? No. It couldn't be. That kind of thing happens to other people. Nonetheless, your hand shakes just slightly as you reach for the handset. You pick up the phone, your hand shaking even worse. Now, as the connection comes through, you hear a voice on the other end. Take a breath, as your blood freezes in your veins. "Hey, I was starting to wonder if you would ever pick up. It's Jim, your friend on the police force." You breathe a sigh of relief. "Thank God. Sorry, I was busy," you mutter, feeling ridiculous, not to mention slightly embarrassed, for thinking it could possibly be the killer. "Listen, the force gave me the day off, so I was wondering if you wanted to go out for breakfast. Just us guys, like old times. I want to get my mind off of these murders. But look, my car is in the shop, so if you could come pick me up in 10. Sure, you agree. You exchange goodbyes, and hang up. It's about a 10-minute drive to his house anyways, so you scribble a hasty note to your wife, and head out the door. You get held up in traffic on the way, and end up arriving about 15 minutes late. You walk to the front door, mentally preparing an apology as you tap the bell. No one answers, so you ring again, wondering if you hit it fully the first time. Still receiving no answer after a third attempt, you try the doorknob. Unlocked. You twist the cold metal and step inside cautiously, calling for Jim. The smell punches you right in the gut, slightly metallic and sickly sweet. The thick miasma seems to be coming from the kitchen. Following your nose, you step into the room. The walls are painted red with what must be blood, and the floors are swimming with the stuff. Jim and his wife lay sprawled on the floor, their chests, arms, and legs cut to pieces. You throw up, violently, staring around in horror. Then your eye catches something. A red message light blinks slowly on the phone. You don't play the message. You already know what it says. Bolting out the front door, your only thought is to get out of the house as fast as you can. Forget the cops, you just want to be away from the grisly image of your best friend lying dead on his own floor. You head to the one and only place you can think of, back home. You slam the door shut behind you as you come in the door, tracking bloody footprints across the floor. You reach the kitchen and call for your wife, but your voice catches mid-yell. Your tracks aren't the only ones. You hear the click of the lock behind you, as your wife's voice says gently, "I just wanted you to be careful." Post views, 2,920. Please wait. Light blinds my eyes after what seemed to be a century of darkness. I stood on an unfamiliar highway. I had no idea where I was or how I got there, but I was there now. A man stood in front of me, dressed in a collared shirt and khaki shorts. He seemed to be in his early 20s. "Where am I?" I asked the man, trying to call back memories of what I was doing before the darkness. The man looked at me, his expression serious, but with a light smile. "Doesn't matter, my friend. All that does is that you're here. I think you'll find that your memories will return soon. Happens to most people when they die." "So I'm dead?" I asked, unable to hide the fear and sadness in my voice. The man jumped, as if surprised by the conclusion that I had drawn. "No. Oh God, no. That would really mess up the plan, now wouldn't it? I'm sorry about the vagueness, but I would rather explain things after you're up to speed." "Up to speed? What are you talking about?" I felt my mind seem to bend and suddenly I remembered. The bridge. The dog that jumped out of the window of the car in front of me, the guardrail breaking as my minivan swerved to avoid the dog, sending me falling into the waters below. the water filling my lungs as I struggled to get out of the car. Then the darkness. Wait, what happened after I died? I asked the man, confused. Well, let's say you were one of the chosen few. You see, when someone dies and is brought back via resuscitation or whatever other ways man has to restore life, there is a sort of system. It's all planned. Men have taken to painting a portrait of death, you know, the hooded skeletal creature with the big sharp scythe. Think of it more like a force. There is no way to control it, and what it chooses happens. One way or another. There is no reason, no cause. But it must happen. Why are you telling me this? And who are you anyway? Who I am, is of no meaning. You are the one that matters here. But if it will calm your nerves, my name was Dennis. Why I am telling you these things, you will find out soon. I looked around at the rather busy highway. Several cars sped past where we stood on the side of the road, not paying us any attention whatsoever. I looked far down the road and saw a large truck coming. A long trailer was hitched to the back, filled with what seemed to be thin metal pipes. About 5 cars ahead of the truck, a pickup truck passed me, throwing out a bottle of beer as it went. The bottle shattered as it hit the blacktop, leaving jagged glass strewn on the road. It was too late to pick it up, but most of the car seemed to see it and swerved around it. The truck came, and although it attempted to pass the bottle's remains, the wheels on the right side of the vehicle spun over the glass, popping one tire at least. The truck swerved, and the driver slammed on the brakes. The gate of the trailer must have not been secured correctly, for it fell open and several pipes fell out at a rather high speed. I looked on in horror as a car behind the truck attempted to stop, but by then it was too late. The car slowed to a sickening stop exactly in front of me as I looked at the terrible fate of the poor driver. One of the fallen pipes had crashed through his windshield, impaling him. I stared in horror for some time, not sure how to react. I rushed to the man, but I knew there was nothing I could do. He began to choke on his own blood as it trickled slowly down his chin. The window was down, so I reached into the car to see if I could at least unfasten his seatbelt. It was impossible, and upon realizing this, I stopped trying and pulled my arm out of the car. I brushed his face along the way, and he fell back, dead. A voice behind me startled me from my horrific trance. It wasn't that of the strange man that I had talked to, so I spun around in surprise. I found myself looking at the man that had just perished before me. He looked from me to the corpse in the driver's seat, and then back to me. I understood. I was death. The dead man tried to say something, but was overcome with surprise and emotion. Finally, he managed to stutter out a single word. "Why?" he asked, trembling all over. Not knowing at all what to say, I thought back to what the man had told me about death earlier. "It's your time, there are no exceptions. Good luck." Dennis came from behind him. He put a hand on the man's shoulder, smiling sadly to him. "Time to go," he said in a voice that somehow immediately suited the man, who then disappeared as if turned into vapor. Dennis turned to me. It's always easier to give the full explanation after the first soul has been passed on. You are now death, but not forever. You see, there aren't as many cases where someone is brought back to life as there are deaths, obviously. So right now, you are in a hospital bed, kind of in limbo between life and death. And for the next day or so, you will be death until a conclusion has been made. You were made for this. This was meant for you. But it doesn't make sense. If I just watched all this happen in 2 minutes, how much time has passed for my body where I lay? That doesn't matter. Although I serve death by departing souls from Earth, I do not know whether death is an actual person. But regardless, death has a system that never fails. If you hadn't gotten into an accident yesterday and had been home watching the news, you probably would have seen this accident. Death uses a sort of rip in time to allow a new person to work as death. It's all so confusing, it's easier to just continue on. So what do you say? Can we just move on? To the next person for me to kill? No thanks. Remember what I said earlier. It will happen, one way or another. Fine. Suddenly we were standing in a small convenience store. I looked around, wondering who could possibly die. A young man stood by the register, and I hoped that it wouldn't be him. The door opened and the bell jingled lightly. A man walked in with a ski mask covering his face. "Oh God, please no," I thought to myself. The man quickly approached the counter and pulled a small revolver out of the jacket he was wearing. He pointed it at the man, and gestured to the cash register. A woman in the store noticed and suddenly let out a scream. The thief turned to the woman, pointing the weapon at her. The rest happened very quickly. 3 shots rang out, and the would-be robber fell to the ground. The cashier stood with a small pistol smoking in his hands. An open drawer behind the counter revealed several rounds of ammunition. I looked down at the dying man, let him bleed for a moment, and then put 2 fingers on his forehead. I turned around to see another form of the man, without the ski mask. He asked the same question as the first one had. "Why?" "Because you're stupid. This is how you spent the rest of your life. Giving a woman a heart attack and making that kid live knowing that he killed someone. Nice life, jackass." Dennis touched him and the robber vanished. "Way to be nice and understanding," he said as we went to the next death scene. We were in a hospital room. Simple enough, lots of people died in the hospital. There were voices drifting into the room from the hall. "You may want to say your goodbyes. I'm very sorry, it has spread too far into his brain. There is no chance. Once again, I am very sorry." At this, the sound of a woman's muffled cries loudly filled the room. I looked to see a young boy in bed, his hair gone and his face sickly pale. I looked at Dennis. "Are you serious?" I asked him. "He's got to be less than 12 years old. Remember, no exceptions," Dennis said calmly. I started to approach the boy when there was a knock on the door. I turned to look, and the woman, apparently more composed, entered the room. She walked straight past me and sat in a chair next to the boy's bed. "Hi sweetheart," she said, taking the boy's hand into hers. He croaked back a hello, hardly able to open his eyes. "Now, I know that this is all going hard, but everything is going to be just I heard what the doctor said, Mom. I love you." "Screw this," I said to Dennis. "I'm not doing it." "Fine," he said. "But remember, I warned you." We were suddenly in the hallway of the hospital, standing near an older doctor and the woman outside the room we were just in. "I can't explain it," the doctor said. "It's like the cancer just disappeared." The mother rushed into the room, followed by the doctor. Dennis and I followed. The same boy sat on his bed, completely different. His face had color, and he seemed happy. "It's some kind of," the doctor began but then suddenly grew quiet. "Do you hear that sound?" I listened, and I heard it. It was the sound of bacon on a pan. Or, more accurately, the sound of gas escaping a container. Suddenly, the cord to the television that was currently playing fell halfway out of its socket, and a few sparks flew into the air. This was apparently enough to cause a huge explosion, and causing me to have to take the lives of several people, including the boy. "Only one more left to go," Dennis said cheerily. "And then I get to go home, right? I'm tired of this." I was so excited to start living again. After about 2 days of taking over others' lives, it would feel great to actually take a hold of my life again. We were suddenly in another hospital, which happened quite often. In my excitement, I wasn't even paying attention. "Clear!" a doctor shouted from a crowd of white-coated assistants. A bare male chest lifted up along with a sound of electrical buzzing. I approached the crowd and tried to get through to see my newest victim. I looked down at the table that the person was lying on. To my astonishment and horror, I looked down to see my own body lying on the table. I looked up for Dennis, but he was gone. I'm not sure how long I stood with the other doctors who were trying to save me, but I finally made a decision based on what I had learned. I placed a hand on my corpse, and I was then thrown back into the deep, dark, never-ending darkness that surrounds death. Credit to Kyle Y. Post views, 3,103. Please wait. Oh, finally. You stand and fight. Jeff is now to his feet, blood and vodka on his face. Once again he gets that strange feeling, the one in which he hasn't felt for a while. Finally, "He's up," says Randy as he runs at Jeff. That's when it happens. Something inside Jeff snaps. His psyche is destroyed, all rational thinking is gone, all he can do is kill. He grabs Randy and pile drives him to the ground. He gets on top of him and punches him straight in the heart. The punch causes Randy's heart to stop, as Randy gasps for breath. Jeff hammers down on him. Punch after punch, blood gushes from Randy's body, until he takes one final breath, and dies. Everyone is looking at Jeff now, the parents, the crying kids, even Troy and Keith. Although they easily break from their gaze and point their guns at Jeff. Jeff sees the guns trained on him and runs for the stairs. As he runs, Troy and Keith let out fire on him, each shot missing. Jeff runs up the stairs. He hears Troy and Keith follow up behind. As they let out their final rounds of bullets, Jeff ducks into the bathroom. He grabs the towel rack and rips it off the wall. Troy and Keith race in, knives ready. Troy swings his knife at Jeff, who backs away and bangs the towel rack into Troy's face. Troy goes down hard and now all that's left is Keith. He is more agile than Troy though, and ducks when Jeff swings the towel rack. He dropped the knife and grabbed Jeff by the neck. He pushed him into the wall. A thing of bleach fell down on top of him from the top shelf. It burnt both of them and they both started to scream. Jeff wiped his eyes as best as he could. He pulled back the towel rack and swung it straight into Keith's head. As he lay there, bleeding to death, he let out an ominous smile. "What's so funny?" asked Jeff. Keith pulled out a lighter and switched it on. "What's funny," he said, "is that you're covered in bleach and alcohol." Jeff's eyes widened as Keith threw the lighter at him. As soon as the flame made contact with him, the flames ignited the alcohol in the vodka. While the alcohol burned him, the bleach bleached his skin. Jeff let out a terrible screech as he caught on fire. He tried to roll out the fire but it was no use. The alcohol had made him a walking inferno. He ran down the hall, and fell down the stairs. Everybody started screaming as they saw Jeff, now a man on fire, drop to the ground, nearly dead. The last thing Jeff saw was his mother and the other parents trying to extinguish the flame. That's when he passed out. When Jeff woke he had a cast wrapped around his face. He couldn't see anything, but he felt a cast on his shoulder, and stitches all over his body. He tried to stand up, but he realized that there was some tube in his arm, and when he tried to get up it fell out, and a nurse rushed in. "I don't think you can get out of bed just yet," she said as she put him back in his bed and reinserted the tube. Jeff sat there, with no vision, no idea of what his surroundings were. Finally, after hours, he heard his mother. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked. Jeff couldn't answer though, his face was covered, and he was unable to speak. "Oh honey, I have great news. After all the witnesses told the police that Randy confessed of trying to attack you, they decided to let you go." This made Jeff almost bolt up, stopping halfway, remembering the tube coming out of his arm. "He'll be out by tomorrow, and then you two will be able to be together again." Jeff's mother hugs Jeff and says her goodbyes. The next couple of weeks were those where Jeff was visited by his family. Then came the day where his bandages were to be removed. His family were all there to see it, what he would look like. As the doctors unwrapped the bandages from Jeff's face, everyone was on the edge of their seats. They waited until the last bandage holding the cover over his face was almost removed. "Let's hope for the best," said the doctor. He quickly pulls the cloth, letting the rest fall from Jeff's face. Bite the Bullet sponsored link. "You may like this woman reads 100 books a month." Blinkist. Jeff's mother screams at the sight of his face. Lou and Jeff's dad stare awestruck at his face. What happened to my face?" Jeff said. He rushed out of bed and ran to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and saw the cause of the distress, his face. It's horrible. His lips were burnt to a deep shade of red. His face was turned into a pure white color, and his hair singed from brown to black. He slowly put his hand to his face. It had a sort of leathery feel to it now. He looked back at his family, then back at the mirror. "Jeff," said Liu, "it's not that bad." "Not that bad?" said Jeff, "it's perfect." His family were equally surprised. Jeff started laughing uncontrollably. His parents noticed that his left eye and hand were twitching. Jeff, are you okay?" "Okay? I've never felt more happy. Ha 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 ha. Look at me. This face goes perfectly with me." He couldn't stop laughing. He stroked his face, feeling it, looking at it in the mirror. What caused this? Well, you may recall that when Jeff was fighting Randy, something in his mind, his sanity, snapped. Now he was left as a crazy killing machine. That is, his parents didn't know. "Doctor," said Jeff's mom, "is my son all right, in the head?" "Oh yes, this behavior is typical for patients that have taken very large amounts of painkillers. If his behavior doesn't change in a few weeks, bring him back here, and we'll give him a psychological test." "Oh, thank you, doctor." Jeff's mother went over to Jeff. "Jeff, sweetie. It's time to go." Jeff looks away from the mirror, his face still formed into a crazy smile. "Came mommy, ha 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 ha." His mother took him by the shoulder and took him to get his clothes. "This is what came in," said the lady at the desk. Jeff's mom looked down to see the black dress pants and white hoodie her son wore. Now they were clean of blood and now stitched together. Jeff's mother led him to his room and made him put his clothes on. Then they left, not knowing that this was their final day of life. Later that night, Jeff's mother woke to a sound coming from the bathroom. It sounded as if someone was crying. She slowly walked over to see what it was. When she looked into the bathroom, she saw a horrendous sight. Jeff had taken a knife and carved a smile into his cheeks. "Jeff, what are you doing?" asked his mother. Jeff looked over to his mother. "I couldn't keep smiling, mommy. It hurt after a while. Now, I can smile forever." Jeff's mother noticed his eyes, ringed and black. "Jeff, your eyes." His eyes were seemingly never closing. "I couldn't see my face. I got tired and my eyes started to close. I burned out the eyelids so I could forever see myself, my new face." Jeff's mother slowly started to back away, seeing that her son was going insane. "What's wrong, mommy? Aren't I beautiful?" "Yes, son," she said. "Yes, you are. Hell, let me go get daddy, so he can see your face." She ran into the room and shook Jeff's dad from his sleep. "Honey, get the gun, She stopped as she saw Jeff in the doorway, holding a knife. "Mommy, you lied." That's the last thing they hear as Jeff rushes them with the knife, gutting both of them. His brother Liu woke up, startled by some noise. He didn't hear anything else, so he just shut his eyes and tried to go back to sleep. As he was on the border of slumber, he got the strangest feeling that someone was watching him. He looked up, before Jeff's hand covered his mouth. He slowly raised the knife, ready to plunge it into Liu. Liu thrashed here and there, trying to escape Jeff's grip. Jeff the Killer. Excerpt from a local newspaper: ominous unknown killer is still at large. After weeks of unexplained murders, the ominous unknown killer is still on the rise. After little evidence has been found, a young boy states that he survived one of the killer's attacks and bravely tells his story. "I had a bad dream and I woke up in the middle of the night," says the boy. "I saw that for some reason the window was open, even though I remember it being closed before I went to bed. I got up and shut it once more. Afterwards, I simply crawled under my covers and tried to get back to sleep. That's when I had a strange feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked up, and nearly jumped out of my bed. There, in the little ray of light, illuminating from between my curtains, were a pair of two eyes. These weren't regular eyes, they were dark, ominous eyes. They were bordered in black and just plain out terrified me. That's when I saw his mouth. A long, horrendous smile that made every hair on my body stand up. The figure stood there, watching me. Finally, after what seemed like forever, he said it. A simple phrase, but said in a way only a madman could speak. He said, 'Go to sleep.' I let out a scream. That's what sent him at me. He pulled up a knife, aiming at my heart. He jumped on top of my bed. I fought him back, I kicked, I punched, I rolled around, trying to knock him off me. That's when my dad busted in. The man threw the knife, it went into my dad's shoulder. The man probably would have finished him off, if one of the neighbors hadn't alerted the police. They drove into the parking lot, and ran towards the door. The man turned and ran down the hallway. I heard a smash, like glass breaking. As I came out of my room, I saw the window that was pointing towards the back of my house was broken. I looked out it to see him vanish into the distance. I can tell you one thing, I will never forget that face. Those cold, evil eyes, and that psychotic smile. They will never leave my head. Police are still on the look for this man. If you see anyone that fits the description in this story, please contact your local police department. Jeff and his family had just moved into a new neighborhood. His dad had gotten a promotion at work, and they thought it would be best to live in one of those fancy neighborhoods. Jeff and his brother Lou couldn't complain though. A new, better house. What was not to love? As they were getting unpacked, one of their neighbors came by. "Hello," she said, "I'm Barbara. I live across the street from you." "Well, I just wanted to introduce myself and to introduce my son." She turns around and calls her son over. "Billy, these are our new neighbors." Billy said hi and ran back to play in his yard. "Well," said Jeff's mom, "I'm Margaret, and this is my husband Peter, and my two sons, Jeff and Liu." They each introduced themselves, and then Barbara invited them to her son's birthday. Jeff and his brother were about to object, when their mother said that they would love to. When Jeff and his family are done packing, Jeff went up to his mom. "Mom, why would you invite us to some kid's party? If you haven't noticed, I'm not some dumb kid." "Jeff," said his mother, "we just moved here, we should show that we want to spend time with our neighbors. Now, we're going to that party, and that's final." Jeff started to talk, but stopped himself, knowing that he couldn't do anything. Whenever his mom said something, it was final. He walked up to his room and plopped down on his bed. He sat there looking at his ceiling when suddenly, he got a weird feeling. Not so much a pain, but a weird feeling. He dismissed it as just some random feeling. He heard his mother call him down to get his stuff, and he walked down to get it. The next day, Jeff walked downstairs to get breakfast and got ready for school. As he sat there, eating his breakfast, he once again got that feeling. This time it was stronger. It gave him a slight tugging pain, but he once again dismissed it. As he and Liu finished breakfast, they walked down to the bus stop. They sat there waiting for the bus, and then, all of a sudden, some kid on a skateboard jumped over them, only inches above their laps. They both jumped back in surprise. "Hey, what the hell?" The kid landed and turned back to them. He kicked his skateboard up and caught it with his hands. The kid seems to be about 12, 1 year younger than Jeff. He wears a Aeropostale shirt and ripped blue jeans. Well, it looks like we got some new meat. Suddenly, 2 other kids appeared. One was super skinny and the other was huge. "Well, since you're new here, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Over there's Keith." Jeff and Liu looked over to the skinny kid. He had a dopey face that you would expect a sidekick to have, and he's Troy. They looked over at the fat kid. Talk about a tub of lard. This kid looked like he hadn't exercised since he was crawling. "And I," said the first kid, "am Randy. Now, for all the kids in this neighborhood there is a small price for bus fare, if you catch my drift." Liu stood up, ready to punch the lights out of the kid's eyes when one of his friends pulled a knife on him. TSK, I had hoped you would be more cooperative, but it seems we must do this the hard way." The kid walked up to Liu and took his wallet out of his pocket. Jeff got that feeling again. Now, it was truly strong, a burning sensation. He stood up, but Liu gestured him to sit down. Jeff ignored him and walked up to the kid. "Listen here you little punk, give back my bro's wallet or else." Randy put the wallet in his pocket and pulled out his own knife. "Oh? And what will you do?" Just as he finished the sentence, Jeff popped the kid in the nose. As Randy reached for his face, Jeff grabbed the kid's wrist and broke it. Randy screamed and Jeff grabbed the knife from his hand. Troy and Keith rushed Jeff, but Jeff was too quick. He threw Randy to the ground. Keith lashed out at him, but Jeff ducked and stabbed him in the arm. Keith dropped his knife and fell to the ground screaming. Troy rushed him too, but Jeff didn't even need a knife. He just punched Troy straight in the stomach and Troy went down. As he fell, he puked all over. Liu could do nothing but look in amazement at Jeff. "Jeff, how'd you?" That was all he said. They saw the bus coming and knew they'd be blamed for the whole thing, so they started running as fast as they could. As they ran, they looked back and saw the bus driver rushing over to Randy and the others. As Jeff and Liu made it to school, they didn't dare tell what happened. All they did was sit and listen. Liu just thought of that as his brother beating up a few kids, but Jeff knew it was more. It was something scary. As he got that feeling, he felt how powerful it was, the urge to just hurt someone. He didn't like how it sounded, but he couldn't help feeling happy. He felt that strange feeling go away, and stay away for the entire day of school. Even as he walked home due to the whole thing near the bus stop, and how now he probably wouldn't be taking the bus anymore, he felt happy. When he got home, his parents asked him how his day was, and he said, in a somewhat ominous voice, it was a wonderful day. Next morning, he heard a knock at his front door. He walked down to find 2 police officers at the door, his mother looking back at him with an angry look. "Jeff, these officers tell me that you attacked 3 kids, that it wasn't regular fighting, and that they were stabbed." "Stabbed, son?" Jeff's gaze fell to the floor, showing his mother that it was true. "Mom, they were the ones who pulled the knives on me and Liu." "Son," said one of the cops, "we found 3 kids, 2 stabbed, 1 having a bruise on his stomach, and we have witnesses proving that you fled the scene. Now, what does that tell us?" Jeff knew it was no use. He could say him and Liu had been attacked, but then there was no proof it was not them who attacked first. They couldn't say that they weren't fleeing, because truth be told they were. So Jeff couldn't defend himself or Liu. "Son, call down your brother." Jeff couldn't do it, since it was him who beat up all the kids. "Sir, it was me. I was the one who beat up the kids. Liu tried to hold me back, but he couldn't stop me." The cop looked at his partner and they both nod. "Well kid, looks like a year in juvie." "Wait," says Liu. They all looked up to see him holding a knife. The officers pulled their guns and locked them on Liu. "It was me, I beat up those little punks. Have the marks to prove it." He lifted up his sleeves to reveal cuts and bruises, as if he was in a struggle. "Son, just put the knife down," said the officer. Liu held up the knife and dropped it to the ground. He put his hands up and walked over to the cops. "No you, it was me. I did it." Jeff had tears running down his face. "Huh, poor bro. Trying to take the blame for what I did. Well, take me away." The police led Liu out to the patrol car. "Liu, tell them it was me. Tell them. I was the one who beat up those kids." Jeff's mother put her hands on his shoulders. "Jeff please, you don't have to lie, we know it's Liu, you can stop." Jeff watched helplessly as the cop car speeds off with Liu inside. A few minutes later Jeff's dad pulled into the driveway, seeing Jeff's face and knowing something was wrong. Son, what is it?" Jeff couldn't answer. His vocal cords were strained from crying. Instead, Jeff's mother walked his father inside to break the bad news to him as Jeff wept in the driveway. After an hour or so Jeff walked back into the house, seeing that his parents were both shocked, sad, and disappointed. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't see how they thought of Liu when it was his fault. He just went to sleep, trying to get the whole thing off his mind. 2 days went by, with no word from Liu at JDC. No friends to hang out with. Nothing but sadness and guilt. That is until Saturday, when Jeff is woke up by his mother, with a happy, sunshiny face. "Jeff, it's the day," she said as she opened up the curtains and let light flood into his room. What's today?" asked Jeff as he stirs awake. "Why, it's Billy's party." He was now fully awake. "Mom, you're joking, right? You don't expect me to go to some kid's party after There was a long pause. "Jeff, we both know what happened. I think this party could be the thing that brightens up the past days. Now, get dressed." Jeff's mother walked out of the room and downstairs to get ready herself. He fought himself to get up. He picked out a random shirt and pair of jeans and walked downstairs. He saw his mother and father all dressed up, his mother in a dress and his father in a suit. He thought, why they would ever wear such fancy clothes to a kid's party. "Son, is that all you're going to wear?" said Jeff's mom. "Better than wearing too much," he said. His mother pushed down the feeling to yell at him and hid it with a smile. "Now Jeff, we may be overdressed, but this is how you go if you want to make an impression," said his father. Jeff grunted and went back up to his room. "I don't have any fancy clothes," he yelled downstairs. "Just pick out something," called his mother. He looked around in his closet for what he would call fancy. He found a pair of black dress pants he had for special occasions and an undershirt. He couldn't find a shirt to go with it though. He looked around, and found only striped and patterned shirts, none of which go with dress pants. Finally he found a white hoodie and put it on. "You're wearing that?" they both said. His mother looked at her watch. "Oh, no time to change. Let's just go," she said as she herded Jeff and his father out the door. They crossed the street over to Barbara and Billy's house. They knocked on the door and it appeared that Barbara, just like his parents, way overdressed. As they walked inside, all Jeff could see were adults. No kids. "The kids are out in the yard. Jeff, how about you go and meet some of them?" said Barbara. Jeff walked outside to a yard full of kids. They were running around in weird cowboy costumes and shooting each other with plastic guns. He might as well be standing in a Toys R Us. Suddenly a kid came up to him and handed him a toy gun and hat. "Hey, wanna play?" he said. "Ah, no kid. I'm way too old for this stuff." The kid looked at him with that weird puppy dog face. "Please?" said the kid. "Fine," said Jeff. He put on the hat and started to pretend shoot at the kids. At first he thought it was totally ridiculous, but then he started to actually have fun. It might not have been super cool, but it was the first time he had done something that took his mind off of you. So he played with the kids for a while, until he heard a noise. A weird rolling noise. Then it hit him. Randy, Troy, and Keith all jumped over the fence on their skateboards. Jeff dropped the fake gun and ripped off the hat. Randy looked at Jeff with a burning hatred. "Hello, Jeff. Is it?" he said. "We have some unfinished business." Jeff saw his bruised nose. "I think we're even. I beat the crap out of you, and you get my brother sent to JDC. Randy got an angry look in his eyes. "Oh no, I don't go for even, I go for winning. You may have kicked our asses that one day, but not today." As he said that, Randy rushed at Jeff. They both fell to the ground. Randy punched Jeff in the nose, and Jeff grabbed him by the ears and head-butted him. Jeff pushed Randy off of him and both rose to their feet. Kids were screaming and parents were running out of the house. Troy and Keith both pulled guns out of their pockets. "No one interrupts or guts will fly," they said. Randy pulled a knife on Jeff and stabbed it into his shoulder. Jeff screamed and fell to his knees. Randy started kicking him in the face. After 3 kicks, Jeff grabs his foot and twists it, causing Randy to fall to the ground. Jeff stood up and walked towards the back door. Troy grabbed him. "Need some help?" He picks Jeff up by the back of the collar and throws him through the patio door. As Jeff tries to stand, he is kicked down to the ground. Randy repeatedly starts kicking Jeff, until he starts to cough up blood. "Come on Jeff, fight me." He picks Jeff up and throws him into the kitchen. Randy sees a bottle of vodka on the counter and smashes the glass over Jeff's head. "Fight." He throws Jeff back into the living room. "Come on Jeff, look at me." Jeff glances up, his face riddled with blood. "I was the one who got your brother sent to JDC. And now you're just gonna sit here and let him rot in there for a whole year. You should be ashamed." Jeff starts to get up,